Shalom and welcome to Wisdom into Our Ministries. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. Tonight we're going to be covering a controversial topic to everyone else. For me, it seems like I'm finally getting a grasp on how to reconcile many of these things. And I want to share with you what I've been researching the last 15 years. Now, please understand that today we're going to cover this in probably in a different way. We're going to give you, I'm following my educational ladder, meaning this. Let me show you the slide so you know what I'm talking about. When I study, when I do certain teachings, I follow an educational platform that I study. Now, what I do, I try to follow a methodology that I've developed for my studies alone. This is the way I study. And if you look at the right of the screen, is I follow an educational ladder. The only thing that's missing there is the legality of the Bible, legality of Scripture, okay? Normally, I just focus on biblical archaeology, cultural context of the Bible, historical context, geographical and context of the temple, in order to systematically start defining terms, looking for information, to understand the biblical narrative and to whom and how and what is the context of what has been addressed. In doing so, then we're able to focus on the context of the letter of the book. And that's what we're going to attempt to do today. I'm going to begin by giving you some cultural backgrounds and contrasting Nisan, or the spring, compared to the ancient Near East. We will address Corinth and when Paul used in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20, and also 23, and he says that Yeshua is the first fruits of those who are from the dead. What does that mean? So what is he really referencing to? Okay. And I think one of the problems that occurred a lot of times when we do these types of studies, and you have to remember that this temple or the temple research is something that, and I can say safely, and it's true, I've been doing this 26 years now, so therefore I can safely say that the temple study within the Hebrew roots, Messianic movement, and even in Judaism, and I know because I have rabbis tell me this in Israel, the temple service as a whole is not really something very much researched. It's not really studied. Now, we studied, we argue about the feast days, we argue about the calendars, we argue about the Omer, we argue about everything else. And please understand that these things, they fall under the jurisdiction of Kedusha, holiness. All of these things are under the temple proper and temple protocol. Now, the wisdom of God was that in every one of the high holidays, every single one of the Moedim, the feasts and the holy convocations, God has done something that really we must understand. He has linked every great observance of the feast days and the holy convocations with the altar by offering sacrifices or offerings on it. The moment that the offerings are placed in conjunction with and connected with the high holidays and the holy convocations and the feasts, now is no longer belongs to the realm of domain of profane. It becomes in the realm of holiness. Only certain people can do some of the services. The priest can officiate in the altar. The Sanhedrin Council, which no one wants to talk about. It's always a struggle and a tug of war of authority and power. And you assume that if we say something about the Sanhedrin, that you are endorsing the religion that we're going to convert tomorrow. And that's not the point. The Sanhedrin Council, the Greek word, really, or the men of the Great Assembly, is actually spoken by God himself in the book of Numbers and also in Exodus 18. So we know that the judicial body, a body of authority that God has established for his people. We can accept that every country has a Supreme Court. Every country that has a constitution, whether it's democratic or whatever it is, a republic, they have a Supreme Court. They have a what do you call it? State court, municipal court, state court, and national, in this case, Supreme Court. Now, the temple had the same thing. The court of 3, the court of 23, and the court of 71. Each one have different jurisdictions based on the severity of the claims or the cases. Now, if we are never really studying the structure of power and authority and to whom it was given certain things in to declare, to decree, and certain things like that, then we're never going to understand it. And we're always going to have a struggle trying to figure out these things. I have been telling people all along, and some lady got mad at me because she says, you're so infatuated with the temple. because I always make the claim that if you give the opportunity to study every commandment related with the temple, and 90%, 95% of the arguments will go away because you will understand the structure, you understand the liturgy, you understand how everything was connected in the covenantal relationship with the temple and the altar. This is it's very pivotal for us to understand. So tonight I'm going to do my best. Listen, I'm not looking to argue. I'm not trying to convince you. That's not my job. My job is only to present the information. But it's only so far that a teacher or anyone can go to try to share with you the primary sources. You have Josephus. You may not like Josephus, but no one can do away with the fact that this man was a priest. He was a Kohen, and he lived in the first century. He saw the temple. He wrote about the temple. He was a priest, so he had access to places that many other people could never go into, and how he becomes a primary source. You have Philo of Alexandria, who also wrote about these things. Then you have later on in the 1800s another writer, Alfred Ehrenheim, in which he was a scholar. He wrote about these things, validating what others are already seen. Then we also have the Bible. Clearly, the Word of God is always above. But the problem that we're having is that we are going back to the whole understanding that we had in the church, sola scripture, scriptura. All I need is the Bible. I don't need anything else. I don't need to learn this. I don't need to do that. I don't need to do this. Let me give you an example how really that makes no sense. I want to show you what I mean. Okay? I want to show you what I mean. When you go into scripture, and we're going to go to the book of Exodus, chapter 20. And I taught this in Spanish this morning. And I always do it different when I do it in English. But I want you to give me the opportunity to at least hear my case. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not even asking you to like me, okay? It's okay. Many people don't like me anyway. I'm okay with that. But let's look at the information and let the evidence stand for what it is, okay? And I'll do my best to share the research that I've done, and then you can go back and look it up. Do a peer review. Go back and compare the information, okay? Now, but the chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, verse 8, is going to give you an example of how sometimes people are saying, all I need is in the Bible. It really doesn't make any sense. I'm going to show you why. It says, remember the day of the Sabbath to consecrate it. The commandment is to consecrate the Sabbath. So my question to you is, how do you consecrate it? The text and the commandment is not explaining to you how you consecrate it. It doesn't tell you. It tells you to do it. It doesn't tell you how. So now you have to ask the question, who are the people whom God appointed to teach you how to consecrate the holy things? You know where you get the answer? Ezekiel chapter 45, actually Leviticus, let's go there, 10:10. Leviticus 10:10 talks about the sons of Aaron. Let me read from verse 8. Then the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, you and your sons with you may not drink wine or strong drink when you come in to the tent of assembly, that you will not die. It is a lasting statute for your generations to distinguish between holy and the unholy, as well as between the unclean and the clean, and to teach the Israelites all of the rules that the Lord has spoken to them through Moses. So it is up to the sons of Aaron to teach you how to consecrate, how to celebrate the feast, how to declare the new moon, how to declare all these things, because every single one of them is connected to the altar, according to Numbers 28 and Numbers 29, which is actually the Musaf, which are the additional offerings that are done on top of the morning and the afternoon offerings. Now, when you go to Leviticus chapter 44, Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 23 and verse 24. It says, and they will teach my people the difference between the holy and the unholy. In this case, it's talking about the sons of Zadok, which are the sons of Aaron. They are priests, okay? All right. So it's talking about they will teach my people the difference between the holy and what is unholy. The difference between unclean and clean, they must show them. Verse 24, very important. At a legal dispute, they themselves shall stand to judge. Who? the sons of Aaron, employing my judgments, they will judge it. They shall judge it. And with respect to my laws and my statutes, my statutes, hukim. Now, when you go back to chapter 23 of the book of Leviticus, and you look at verse right here, verse 14. I'm going to come back and forth. I want to show you something. I'm going to read verse 14, and then I go back to Ezekiel. It says, and you shall not eat bread or roasted grain or ripe grain until this very same day, until you present your God's offering. This must be a lasting statute of your generations in all of your dwellings. So Ezekiel 44 tells you that in all of the statutes, hukim, these are decrees established by God, given to the sons of Aaron to teach us what is holy, what is not holy, what is clean, and what is unclean. And it says, all my festivals they shall keep, and my Sabbath they shall consecrate. So according to Exodus 20, verse 8, when God says, remember the Sabbath day and consecrate it, later on in Leviticus 10:10 and on Ezekiel 44, verse 23 and 24, it tells you who are in charge of consecrating those things. What if they do something wrong? What if they don't teach you the right way? What if they err in judgment? What does the Bible say about that? Let's go to Numbers chapter 18. Numbers 18. What does God say about that? The Lord tells Israel, the Lord said to Aaron, you, your sons, and your family with you will bear the guilt of the sanctuary. You and your sons with you will bear the guilt of your priesthood. Moreover, bring your brothers with you, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, that they may be joined to you and minister to you, you and your sons with you before the tent of testimony. They will keep your responsibility and the responsibility of all the tent. Only they, the Levites, they may not come near the vessels of the sanctuary and the altar. So both you and they will not die. They will be joined to you, and they will keep the responsibility of the tent of assembly for the entire service of the tent. A stranger, a czar, and illegitimate may not come to you, near you. You will keep the responsibility of the sanctuary and the responsibility of the altar. Those are the sons of Aaron, and there will no longer be wrath upon the Israelites. So therefore, God is very clear. He is telling us, I have chosen the temple proper. I have chosen the altar. I have chosen the priests to consecrate and to declare what is clean and unclean, holy and unholy. He's not going to change it. Neither you and I can change it. That means that neither you and I can start a new calendar. That means that neither you and I can change the chukim, the chukah Pesach. Did you know that Pesach is a chukim? It's a chok? No one can change it. This is very important. It has to go through a procedure of judicial matters, a legal case. Okay? The Haggadah, the telling of the story, is actually a fulfillment of commandments on chapter 13, verse 8 of the book of Exodus. That's why you do the 15 steps. And it's all a telling of the story of redemption. So therefore, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back to chapter 23 of the book of Leviticus. We're going to read from verse 1 all the way to verse 14. We're going to be focusing from verse 9 to verse 14, and I'm going to read you information. I'm going to read to you cultural backgrounds. Was the observance of the feast during the spring something only for Israel that they did? Or was it common ground in the ancient Near East, and there was a distinction between Israel did it, the way Israel did it, and the way the nations did it, and the purpose? Why do we have 50 days, all the way from Pesach and the waving of the Omer all the way into Pentecost? Why is that? How come you're not to bring the first fruits, according to the Mishnah, until, and by the way, that's actually told to us in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 26. Let's go there real quick. Deuteronomy. Numbers, I mean. The book of Numbers, chapter 26. Chapter 28, verse 26, when it's talking about the weeks. Listen to what it says. And on the days of first fruits, so 50 days. First fruits is not one day. First fruits begin the moment they wave the Omer. and it ends on the day of Pentecost. And on the day of first fruits, when you are presenting the new offerings for the Lord during your festival of weeks, you will have a holy convocation. So that means that Passover is not over until Pentecost is fulfilled. That, by the way, is very significant. You know why? The reason why it's significant is because we know that Yeshua told the disciples to wait until the day of Pentecost. Why was that? That's what we're going to examine today. So I'm going to go through a list of information. First, I got them all lined up for you. So we're going to start reading. Let me read the chapter, the first 14 verses. And then I'm going to read the information that I have for you. Okay? This is a very controversial topic. Everybody has an opinion. But when it's about presenting the information and trying to share the info, people don't want to hear it. And we cannot have it both ways. At least give people the opportunity to state their case. Okay? If you don't agree with me afterwards, that's perfectly fine. But don't disagree with something you never really studied. Okay? All right. So it says in the book of Leviticus chapter 23, it says this. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, speak to the Israelites, and say to them, the festivals of Adonai, by the way, it doesn't say festivals in Hebrew, okay? The Moedim, appointed times, or not Chagim. Very important, you know the difference, okay? It says, of the Lord, you shall proclaim our holy assemblies. They are appointed times. Then it starts with a Sabbath. For 6 days, work is to be done, and on the seventh day, it shall be a Sabbath complete rest, a holy assembly. You shall not do any work on it. Shall be a Sabbath for the Lord in all your dwellings. Okay. Remember, the commandment of the Sabbath is a sign between God and the people of Israel. It's also for us to consecrate it. Here is telling us more information. It's saying you should not do any work. But wait a minute. What constitutes work? Who determines that? Who determines what is work and what is not? And this is the struggle that we have. According to the Bible, God gave that responsibility and the Sabbath to be consecrated by the priests. So it is the Sanhedrin Council composed of 23 priests, 23 Levites, and 23 Israelites. They're the ones who determine, because it's under the realm of holiness, they're the ones who start examining and thinking what is work and what is not work. Whether you like it or not, that's just biblically the way it is. And it says, so now Passover, these are the Lord's appointed times, holy assemblies, which you shall proclaim at the appointed times. Appointed times. That means that the appointed times cannot be declared by you. I don't care who you are. According to the Torah, we do not have the legal jurisdiction to declare the new moons as the beginning of a new calendar. Guys, it's biblical. You can see it, you can recognize a new moon, and you can say, hey, we have a new moon. Let's get together and do a service as a commemoration of the new moon. Not a problem. It's not a Sabbath unless it falls on the regular weekly Sabbath. Okay? But these things are actually regulated by the priests according to the Torah. I just read you that earlier. The appointed times and the Sabbath is up to them to consecrate them and to appoint them. Okay? In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening of the Lord's Passover, and on the 15th day of the month is the Lord's feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day there shall be a holy assembly for you, holy convocation. It's a special Sabbath, and you should do any regular work. And there are distinct things that you can do. You could cook on this particular Sabbath, okay, on the special ones, because this is a flexible calendar in which this particular day can fall either before the regular weekly Sabbath or on a weekly Sabbath or immediately after a weekly Sabbath. So if it falls before a weekly Sabbath, then it will be difficult to keep everybody in check and to have food. So God allows for this particular special Sabbath, because it's a feast, to prepare the food. Okay? All right. On the first day, there shall be a holy assembly for you. You shall not do any work, any regular work, and you shall present an offering for the Lord made by fire for 7 days. And on the seventh day, there shall be a holy assembly. So you have a special Sabbath on the first day and the last day, and in the middle of that week, you have a regular weekly Sabbath. Are you with me so far? Give me some comments over here on Facebook. I don't know if anybody's even commenting, but it would be nice if you guys would be active, you know. Now, verse 9. Verse 9 says, Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you come into the land that I'm about to give to you, and you reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. To the priest. To the priest. Very important note. Okay? And he, the priest, shall wave the sheaf before Adonai for your acceptance. The priest shall wave it on the day after the Sabbath. That's the controversy we're having now. Which Sabbath is it talking about? It's all about this particular thing. Which Sabbath? The Sadducee says one thing, the Pharisee says one other, but it doesn't matter what the Sadducees and the Pharisees say. It's what the Sanhedrin Council ruled based on the evidence and what they have. So what we need to investigate is, what is the witness account from people closest to the events and what they saw? How come Yeshua never once had any issues with the calendars in the first century? That's the first question you have to ask. How come Yeshua never had an issue with any of the calendars? How come he never criticized the calendar in Israel? How come Peter or John or Peter or Paul or James or any of the disciples after Yeshua died and resurrected had any issue with the calendar? As a matter of fact, we know that Paul was hurrying to get to Jerusalem to keep Pentecost because he did an Nazarite vow. So my question is, how come this never became a topic of contention in the first century? How come is it now? How come Yeshua never said anything about any calendar? He never said anything about the Essene calendar. He never said anything about any other calendar except that. By the way, he never had that much arguments with the Sadducees. The only argument he was having is by the Pharisees. And by the way, not all the Pharisees were part of the Sanhedrin Council. In the Sanhedrin Council, you have Sadducees and you have Pharisees in a belief in certain things, but they all abide by the ruling of the Sanhedrin Council, whether they liked it or not. You see, we want to follow the Torah, but we don't want to work under the authority of not necessarily the religion of Judaism, what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about biblical law, not religion. Now, I got to say something about Judaism. Many things, they're walking in order because they understand law. That's why you never see, in Judaism, you never see any issues with the Sabbath, with a feast, in any calendar. They're all celebrating it happily while we are arguing and changing calendars. There's a problem with that. You will think that after 3,700 years, they've been following it, that they have find a new argument because they read better Hebrew than we ever did. They grow up doing this. And I'm not here defending a religion, guys, because if a Christian says something that is right according to the Bible, we give credit and honor to that. If a Messianic says something that is correct according to the scripture, we give honor to that. If a Jew, Orthodox, whether he believes in Yeshua or not, also gives the proper interpretation of the Torah, we give honor to that. But the notion that it's only acceptable if they believe in Yeshua is ridiculous of itself. Because in the first century, Paul will go to the temple. Peter went to the temple. James went to the temple. And we don't know if all of those priests believe in Yeshua or not. Although we have evidence that many of the priests believe in the faith. But they never stopped doing their service. So, we've come to the point that we have this tug of war arguing about temple rituals and protocols that we don't study. And I can speak in a confidence, not arrogance, because these are the areas that I'm wanting to look more into. I have a teacher who knows way more than I do, and we have the resources that gives us at least an opportunity to have a more broader perspective without being so dogmatic. We want the evidence. So therefore, allow me the opportunity to read those to you. Okay? We need to learn to be quicker to hear and slower to reject. We are too quick to reject everything. And I like to have after 20, I would like to think that after 20 years doing this, and that you will give me the opportunity to at least hear me out, even if you don't agree with me. That would be wonderful. Okay? Even if you don't like me, it's okay. Okay? All right. Half the time I don't like myself anyway. So you're in good company. But at least we can hear one another. So what does John Walton? John Walton, according to the Sundervan Illustrated Bible Commentary, he is talking about how in the outside of Israel, how they were celebrating the spring festivals. Every religion had it. Watch this. From the Sundervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary, Volume 1, he says, outside Israel, festivals often commemorated mythic events. For example, the Babylonian New Year festival included celebration of Marduk, elevation to supremacy over the gods. Fertility was a major festival theme, and some mythic events, such as the death of Baal in the fall of his revival in the spring. Interesting. So they believed that Baal would die in the fall and he will resurrect in the spring, because they all understood that the spring was a motif for resurrection. Why? The winter is death, spring, the rains come, then you have the seed that was actually planted in the winter, and now it resurrects. So the motif of resurrection was prevalent throughout the ancient Near East, not just Israel. Fertility was a major festival theme, and some mythic events such as the death of Baal in the fall and his revival in the spring in the Canaanite motif were related to renewal of agricultural cycles. As with Israelite festivals, especially elevated sheaf weeks and booths, cyclical holidays and sacrifices of other peoples could punctuate the agricultural cycle calendar at crucial points, such as harvest time. This was because the agricultural bounty, which was crucial for survival and well-being, was regarded as dependent of the favor of the deities. Thus, there were yearly celebrations of great harvests at the temple of Baal in Ugarit. Festivals could also include purification of holy places and objects. But non-Israelite festivals did not explicitly commemorate historical deliverance of the people by their deity, as did some Israelite sacred times, such as Passover, unleavened bread, and Booth. Let me go here to the commentary because it didn't read it all. So I'm going to go here real quickly, and this was on Leviticus 23. I want to go to the whole thing. I think it's important. There we go. These are the Lord's appointed feasts. In Numbers 28 and 29 complements the liturgical calendar of Leviticus 23 by specifying communal sacrifices to be performed regularly every day, weekly on the seventh-day Sabbath, monthly at new moons, and yearly in various annual festivals. Aside from the Sabbath, which was unique to Israel, other peoples had similar ritual cycles. For example, at Ugarit, there were regular daily sacrifices, new moon sacrifices, annual festivals, and Hittite cult inventories specified daily offerings and festivals. Although the Israelites, Babylonians, and Hittites had different rituals and theological systems, they share some basic concepts concerning the timetable of obligation towards their deities. The need to provide twice daily regular offerings and additional offerings on festive occasions, and the need to periodically purify sacred objects and or precincts pertaining to those deities. From earlier times, ancient Near Eastern people were very religious. Nowhere is this more evident, as they that in their splendid array of cyclical festivals, which could be lengthy. For example, the Sukru festival to all the gods of Omer lasted 7 days. Interesting. This is all spring festivals. And this one lasted 7 days. We have Passover lasting 7 days. Why? Why is it that God is actually using these motifs that seem so similar to other countries? Have you ever looked at the flora and fauna in ancient Near East and also Greece and Rome and Asia Minor? They live in the northern hemisphere. Therefore, spring is the same time frame. they harvest at the same time. Therefore, winter is more or less the same time frame. Some countries it lasts a little longer than others, but it's by and large the same time frame. So they will harvest the same type of thing. If they all believe, if they all believed that their God had dominion over creation and it was all based on fertility rituals, why do you think God asked Israel that to them the beginning of years in the agricultural cycle would have been in Nisan, when already all the nations are doing the same thing? To make a difference, to make a distinction, to become a separate kingdom, so that the nations will see that Israel will take the first fruits of the land, the 7 species that are given in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8, and that Israelites will bring it to the temple where there is no image, to a temple where the God is not eating the sacrifice, is a food source for the priests. Well, the food is going to be given as a free will offering or the first fruits, and that will take care of people who are in need. It's a complete different perspective in the temple as it was in the ancient Near East. So therefore, he's using what the world knew and redirected its purpose and its function and the role of Israel to become a distinct people in the world by bringing everything they possess to the Lord instead of giving it to the gods of fertility. Let's continue. It says, Hittite festival texts, the largest attested genre in extant Hittite literature, preserve memory of some extraordinarily elaborate Hittite festivals that lasted for several weeks and apparently involved royal tours, pilgrimage to cultic centers around the empire. Interesting. So all these people are having celebrations that last for weeks, and then the Lord says, I want my people to do them, but to celebrate him, to celebrate God, to celebrate his kingship, his authority, his power, creation that he controls, that he has dominion over, not Baal and not Marduk. Let's continue reading. Outside of Israel, festivals often commemorated mythic events. For example, the Babylonian New Year festival included celebration of Marduk's elevation to supremacy over the gods. Newsflash, people, the Babylonian New Year, it was actually in the month of Nisan. It's actually in Nisan. It's in the spring. And this lasted for 12 days. And there's also the Akitu ritual that they did. And it says, let me read this again. Outside Israel, festivals often commemorated mythic events. For example, the Babylonian New Year festival included celebration of Marduk's elevation to supremacy over the gods. Fertility was a major festival theme, and some mythic events, such as the death of Baal in the fall and his revival in the spring, Canaanites, were related to renewal of agricultural cycles. And with Israelite festivals, especially the elevated, I already read that part, okay? So as we can see now, we know that in the ancient world, they had these particular rituals that was different in purpose and in function. And God is expecting us to do the opposite like he prescribed, so we can make a distinction and have no connection with fertility rituals. All right? Read John Walton. Now let us read about the Sanhedrin and their authority. And this is always controversial, and there's always people tune off. Every time I mention this, people just go running off. Oh, Rico's into Judaism. No, I'm understanding the legality of the Bible. When it comes to the feast, I understand to whom it belongs the authority to declare and to establish and make them holy. The Hall of Hewn Stone, Lishkat Hagasit, is in which the Bet Din sat, was situated in the southern side of the inner court of the temple, specifically Beit Aptinas, okay, in the southeast corner of the Asarah, which is the priestly area. It was used for ritual purpose also. The priest drawing lots there for the daily service of the offerings, also for the reciting of the Shema. The larger part of the hall was on the side of the court of the layman. In other words, the temple was divided. That building was divided in 2 parts, 100 cubits long. 50 was a high elevation of holiness, and the other 50 cubits was actually where the Sanhedrin will sit, because then the people could come in. says there were two entrances, one from the court of the priest, which was used by the latter, by the priest, and the other in the water gate, used by the laity. The great Beit Din sat daily. Watch this. The great Beit Din, the house of judgment, sat daily, except on the Sabbath and on the feast days, between the morning and evening sacrifices, on the Sabbath and the feast days, on which there were no meetings in the hall of hewn stone. The members of the Beit Din assembled in the schoolhouse of on the Temple Mount. According to the accounts given to the Talmudic sources, the great Beit Din had the following functions, which it exercised in part as a body and in part through committees of its members. Why were there committees? Because you needed to have different committees because of the fact that there are certain people that could only render judgment on the things that belong to their jurisdiction. For example, the priests, they had the legal jurisdiction to only render judgments on the things, the priests on basically everything, but mainly for the altar and the utensils and the sacrifices and anything dealing with offerings, because they're the ones who had to handle that. Okay, the Levites could not render judgment on that. The Levites could render judgment on some other stuff. The Israelites could not render judgment on the realm of the jurisdiction of the Levites or the ones on the priests. For the priests had the higher authority of overruling everything in a lot of cases because they were in charge of separating the holy and profane, the clean and unclean. Hope that makes sense. Right here, where am I? Okay, I'm in this place right here. No, sorry. Let me read it again. According to the accounts given to the Talmudic sources, the great Beit Din had the following functions, which it exercised in part as the body or in part as committees of its members. It has supervision over the temple service, which was ran by the priests, which was required to be conducted in conformity with the law and according to Pharisaic interpretation, meaning more stricter than the Sadducees. Okay, it decided which priests should perform the temple service. It supervised especially important ritual acts as the Day of Atonement. It had in charge the burning of the red heifer and the preparation of the water purification. When the body of a murdered person was found, member of the great Beit Din had to take the necessary measures in order to determine which city, as being the nearest to the place of the murder, was to bring an offering of atonement. By the way, this is actually Leviticus chapter 1 through 7 talks about this. So this is not an invention of the Orthodox Judaism. This is actually Torah law. Okay. It has also to decide. It had also to decide as to the harvest tithe. It sat in judgment on women suspected of adultery, and it sentenced them to drink the bitter waters. It arranged the calendar. This is important. It's part of their job. In the Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah, you see that there. There is a large courtyard in Jerusalem called Beit Yasek, which all the witnesses gather, and the court examine them. And now they prepare a big meal for them, so they should make it a habit of coming. So if you read that, you see how it was done in the temple. Okay, and it provided copies of the Torah for the Torah scroll for the king, and probably for the temple also. In general, it decided all doubtful questions relating to the religious law, and render the final decision in regards to the sentence of a teacher who promulgated opinions contradicting the traditional interpretation. Yeah, I cannot find my cursor here. I don't know where it is. I hope I find it, because then I don't know what to do. Okay. See if I find it somewhere. Give me a second. When I need stuff, it goes crazy on me. There we go. Okay. So now that we got that, hopefully you're enjoying this. I know I'm giving you different types of information to state my case, but we have to give you the evidence. I don't expect you to believe me just because I say it. So I read to you what the cultural background was. I'm reading you about what the Sanhedrin, their functions and their authority. So now let's continue to go here and speak a little bit more about now first century eyewitness and how the Omer was done in the temple. Now, if you don't believe in Josephus, fine, but it's an ocular example or a witness of somebody who saw it. This is, you have to, as a good studier of the word, you cannot just say, oh, I just read Leviticus 23. I don't need any more witness, because then you come to your own conclusions. Because the Bible is written for us, but not to us. So therefore, there are many things that are written that are necessarily explained, because God already determined that he had a body of people. They had a group of people that were set aside to teach the people how to separate the holy and profane with the highest level of holiness. Okay, so Flavius Josephus, in the works of Josephus, completed on a bridge, okay, talks about, and I forgot which book it was, so I apologize if I don't give you the book here. It says, in the month of Santicus, which is called Nisan, it is the beginning of our year, on the 14th day of our lunar month, when the sun is in Aries, for it is in this month that we were delivered from bondage under the Egyptians, and law ordained that we should every year slay a sacrifice, which I before told you we slew when we came out of Egypt, and which was called the Passover. So we do celebrate this Passover in companies. You have to do it in the temple times. You did it between minimum 10 people, maximum 30 people, depending on the source. Some other people say 20 people maximum, but you have to do it in groups, not individually. Leaving nothing to what we sacrifice into the following day. Paragraph 249 says, the feast of unleavened bread succeeds that of the Passover, and falls on the 15th day of the month. That's the first day of unleavened bread, which is a special Sabbath. We have now the first day of unleavened bread, a special Sabbath. We have a weekly Sabbath, and we have the last day of unleavened bread is also special Sabbath. So the week of Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection, there were two Sabbaths. One a high holiday, a holy convocation, and the other one the weekly Sabbath. We are now addressing the one that is not the weekly Sabbath in this case. We're talking about the high holiday, which is the 15th. That's when we eat the Passover, on the night of the 15th, okay? Which is a high holiday. Okay. And it says, the Feast of Unleavened Bread succeeds that of the Passover and falls on the 15th day of the month, and continues 7 days, wherein they feed on unleavened bread, on every one of which days two bulls are killed, one ram, 7 lambs. Now these lambs are entirely burnt, beside the kid of the goats, which is added to all the rest for sins. For it is intended as a feast for the priest on every one of those days. The word sin here is purification. Paragraph 250. But on the second day, well, this is what Josephus says. Pay attention. It's not me saying it. Josephus gives you the witness. Consider the witness. I wasn't there. If he is lying, then he is lying. It's 2,000 years removed. We are from the event. He is there in the first century. Okay? But on the second day of unleavened bread, which is the 16th day of the month, they first partake of the fruit of the earth. For before that day, they do not touch them. I'm going to read what that means in a minute. That is actually verse 14 of Leviticus 23. And while they suppose proper to honor God, from whom they obtain this plentiful provision, in the first place, they offer the first fruits of their barley, and that in the manner following, they take a handful of the ear and dry them, and beat them small, and purge the barley from the bran. They then bring on the 10th deal to the altar, to God, and casting one handful upon the fire, they leave the rest for the use of the priests. And after this, it will be made publicly and private reap their harvest. They also, at this participation of their first fruits of the earth, sacrifice a lamb as a burnt offering to God. Okay, Josephus said that this was to be taking place on the 16th day of Nisan. That's the day after the unleavened bread high Sabbath. Okay, so now let us go to another resource that I have here. This is called the Avodah HaKorbanot. It is this book right here. Whoops. It is this book right here. Hopefully this is making sense for you guys. I'm going to give you as much information as I can. It's for you to go back and watch it and validate it and look into it. Okay? Again, I'm not looking to convince you. That's not my job. My job is to present the evidence and you weigh it out. Don't believe what I say, go back and validate it. Okay? But look into it first. Let's read from this resource, which tells you how everything was done in the temple. Okay? I'm going to read it I have it on PDF. So this is what is reaping of the Omer. Avodah Korbanot, how they will prepare the Omer. Says the Torah commands that before partaking of each year's new crop, a mincha offering must be brought by the community for the new produce, which permits the new crop for consumption. This offering was known as the mincha haomer, or simply the Omer, and was brought each year on the second day of the Passover festival. Now, let me go back to the verses. I'm going to go back and I'm going to read Leviticus 23 before I continue here. Leviticus 23, verse 9, all the way to verse 14, and then I'm going to go back to the resource. I'm going to tell you what it's saying here, and then we're going to explain how it was done. It says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you come to the land that I'm about to give you, and you reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruit of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for your acceptance. The priest shall wave it on the day after the Sabbath. As a matter of fact, Passover is not over until Pentecost, and Pentecost will start, the counting for Pentecost will start immediately after the Omer. That's where the counting begins. Okay? It says, and on the day of your waving, the sheep you shall offer a yearling male lamb without defect as a burnt offering to the Lord. And his grain offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah, fine mill flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to the Lord, an appeasing fragrance, and his libation shall be 1/4 of a hin of wine. Verse 14. This is extremely important. By the way, guys, I never understood it. I never understood this, and I struggle like you until I understood this verse. When I understood this verse, then I knew why it was important for the Omer to be waved, and then why Yeshua resurrected the next day. Very important. I believe Yeshua died and resurrected. He died on the afternoon of the 14th. He was buried before the 15th, and then he resurrected on the 17th. And then he became the first fruit of those who are asleep. Gotcha. But he did not resurrect it until after they waved the Omer. Not before. Very important. Why? Because they all believe that winter was death and that the spring was life. You can look it up. In the ancient Greco-Roman world, they believed that the spring represented renewal, represented life, represented new beginnings, represented everything that they relate to a new creation, more or less. Okay, we keep that in mind. So when they wave the Omer and then Yeshua resurrects, it's a new creation motif. Scholars know this. Okay, that's why you're not allowed to eat of the new grain until you wave it. Let's read it. Let me explain that a little bit better. It's the importance of the temple service, guys. I keep telling you all, you need to learn the temple. And people mock me for this, by the way, and it's okay. But I keep telling you, you want to understand the feast days better, study the temple. They are all connected with the altar. Verse 14, and you shall not eat bread or roasted grain or ripe grain until this very same day, when they already waved it, until you present your God's offering. This must be a lasting statute for your generations in all your dwellings. This is a chukim. It's a chok. It's a decree. No one can change it. Okay. With that being said, I just read you how they were doing the first fruits. The Omer it tells you in the Bible. Let me go to Joshua chapter, I forgot, but I'll get there. People argue about this. And remember, in the book of Joshua, I think it's chapter 6. I hope it is. Somebody help me. Juan, can you write it down for me? Right here in the text, in the chat. Joshua, is it chapter 5? Yeah, there we go. Verse 8 to verse 12. Listen to what it says. Check it out. It says, and it happened when all the nation had finished circumcising, they remained that they were in the camp until they recovered. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the disgrace of Egypt from you. Therefore, the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. And the Israelites camped at Gilgal, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening on the plains of Jericho. On the next day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land on unleavened cakes and roasted corn. And the manna ceased that day after. And they started eating the produce of the land, and there was no longer manna for the Israelites. And they ate of the crops of the land of the Canaanites that year. Perfect. It doesn't tell you which day it was, because Passover can land it every time, every day, or any time of the week. This year, it fell on a Monday night. Okay. Not a month ago. It's just this month. Okay. So therefore, Passover is a fluid type thing in the spring based on the Aviv, based on the barley being ready or not. You can see the new moon, but if the barley is not ready, then it's not the spring. It's connected with the altar. And if the barley's ready and the new moon is declared, it requires a sacrifice for declaration of the new moon. That's Numbers chapter 28, verse 11 and verse 12 and 13. Remember that. So therefore, you cannot just declare your own new moon and new calendars, because according to the Torah, it's prescribed and connected that the priests are the one who declare it, and that they are the ones who proclaim them holy, and they're the ones who decree them, right, to become holy, and it's connected with the altar. Now, you can go and cite the barley in Israel if you want to, but even if it's cited and it's Aviv, you don't have the legal authority and jurisdiction by yourself to declare a new moon or a new calendar, because the Torah clearly says that it's only the priests who are in charge of that job. Guys, the Bible's clear on this. The Bible's very clear on this. I really do not understand why is this such an issue. I really don't. All right, let's continue. Now that I read you this, and verse 14 is important, and that's what made the difference for me. You're not allowed to eat the new grain until you wave it. You can eat of the old grain, but you cannot eat of the new grain until it's waved. Okay, that's important. So now when I go to the source here that I was reading earlier, how was this done in the temple? It is a positive commandment to offer a minchat haomer, on the 16th day of Nisan, as is stated in Leviticus 23:10. You shall bring an omer from your first harvest to the priest. Now, how was this done? The mitzvah, the command to bring the omer, begins with its reaping on the night of the 16th. So now you have Passover, they slaughter on the 14th. They now eat it on the night of the 15th. On the day of the 15th, they have certain offerings they need to do in the temple. Now, when the 15th is over, that night hits, now is the night of the 16th. This is when this ritual is taking place. And I need your support here. I want you to tell me how many of you on social media, as well as here in my chat, how many of you have never really studied how the omer was prepared and it was waved in the temple? How many of you have never studied that before? Please give me some feedback so I know where you're at. The majority of the people don't even know about it. Okay. Cain and Abel's is completely different. It was a voluntary offering. It was a mincha. It had nothing to do with the omer. Okay, something completely different. All right. It says, optimally, it should be taken from the standing stalks that are still moist, only from the land of Israel, and only from the choicest crops. Additionally, the omer offering was brought from barley. And how was this done? On the Erev Yom Tov, okay, which is the eve of the good, the good day, agents of the Beit Din. There you go. Agents of the Beit Din from the Sanhedrin Council, the house of judgment, will be sent out to find suitable barley. It wasn't just anybody. It was the agent of the Sanhedrin Council, the Beit Din, because the Torah says that they're the ones who declare the holy things. It says, and they will tie it in bundles while the stalks will still attach to the ground. This happened before the 15th, by the way. They have to do this before the 15th because the 15th is a Sabbath. They could not do this work. All right, watch. And it says, let me read it again. And they will tie it to the bundles while the stalks will still attach to the ground. So it will be easy to reap. All the inhabitants on the neighboring cities will gather there, so that the reaping of the Omer will be done with great fanfare. They will gather 3 seah, like 37 liters, measures of barley, with 3 different people gathering it in 3 different baskets, using 3 different sickles. Once the sky grew dark, the reaper would ask all of the assembled, has the sun set? And they would answer, yes. He would ask with his sickle, and they would answer, yes. And he would ask again, with this sickle? And they would answer, yes. He would ask the 3rd time, with this sickle? And they would answer, yes. He would ask, into this box? And they would answer, yes. He would ask again, into this box? And they would answer, yes. He would ask a 3rd time, in this box? And they would answer, yes. If it was on Shabbat, the reaper would ask, is it Shabbat today? And they would answer, yes. And this too was done 3 times. He would ask, shall I cut? And they would ask, and they will say, cut. And this too will be repeated 3 times for each and every question. By the way, have you ever read Revelation 14, verse 14 and 19 in regards to this? You want to look at it? Let me finish this and I'll go read that. It says, they will reap the barley stalks, put them in a basket, bring them to the temple courtyard. They will then beat the stalks to remove the kernels, and then winnow the kernels and pick through them, removing any pebbles or stones, until only the choice parts remained. Then they took the barley and toasted it in fire inside a perforated copper pipe, as it is written in Leviticus 2:14, toasted with fire, over fire, and then spread it out in the courtyard so the wind could blow on it. Next, they will place the kernel on a bean mill and grind the 3 seahs, extracting in the end from all the reaped barley 1/10 ephah measure of flour that have been sifted through 13 sieves. This is how they perform the mitzvah of reaping the Omer for the house of our God. May it be revealed speedily in our days. Amen. So now we know how this was done in the temple. And then the next day, they will do the offering. On the 16th day of Nisan, after they had offered the Musaf, the additional offering, and its accompanying mincha offering, they would turn their attention to the 10th ephah of fine flour and mix it together with 1 log of oil and kametz measure and levona, which is I forgot now, frankincense, I think. I forgot, I'm sorry. And it was placed on it, whereupon it was waved, tenufa. It was waved to the east of the mitzbeach, or the altar. The priest would have wave it back and forth and up and down. Then go touch it to the point of the southwest corner of the altar. And then they will do everything else. They will go through the whole requirement of the sacrifices. So they will do a few things. First, they will bring on the night of the 16th, after the regular weekly Sabbath, after the high holiday Sabbath have gone by, okay, that's the 15th ended. On the night of the 16th, they're going to get and reap it, and they're going to prepare it, they're going to roast it, and then on the next day, they're going to wave it. Okay? And then they do the sacrifices. How do I know this is true? Because no sacrifices were done at night. Therefore, when it says after the Musaf, that's implying that the morning sacrifice was done, the offering, and then the Musaf, the additional ones for the feast, which I'm going to show you where they're at. Let's go to the book of Numbers, chapter 28. Numbers, chapter 28. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. Okay. Okay, watch this. It says, on the 14th day of the first month of the Passover of the Lord, on the 15th day of this month is a religious feast. Unleavened bread must be eaten for 7 days. On the first day, there will be a holy convocation. You will do no any regular work. You will present an offering by fire, a burnt offering for the Lord, 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs, male lambs in the first year. They will be for you without defect. For their grain offering, you will offer fine meal flour mixed with oil, 3/10 for bulls and 2/10 for ram. You will offer 1/10 for each of the 7 male lambs and a goat for a sin offering to make atonement for you. You will offer besides the burnt offerings of the morning, which is for a continual burnt offering. Like this, you will offer daily for 7 days the food of the offering made by fire. Meaning that when you go back to the source, when it says that after the Musaf, the additional offerings, these are the additional offerings. You got the morning, you have the afternoon, and then you have the ones for the feast, the Musaf. So therefore, they will waive it after these were done. And you don't do that at night. You prepare, you roast it at night like you did over there, but you present it and wave it in the daytime. Is this making sense to you? Have anyone ever explained it like this to you guys? Give me an idea, because I never really ask. Have anyone really explained it like this before? Hopefully this is helping. I just want to help you guys. I want to give you as much information as I can. Okay, so now that I read that and I showed you the procedure, I showed you the ritual, the way it was done in the ancient Near East, how they all have rituals, how God now wants Israel to be a distinct amongst them. Then I read to you also the power and function of the Sanhedrin, or the Beit Din. I also read to you about what Josephus said. It was done on the 16th. I also read to you about, I haven't read to you Philo. Watch this. Philo, which also lived in the 1st century. I think I forgot right now. I went blank. But in one of his books, it's called Works, the Works of Philo. In paragraph 162, it says right here, I think is chapter 29. Okay, it says right here, there is also a festival on the day of the Passover festival, which follows the first day, and this is called the sheaf. This is the Omer, by the way, of what happens on it. For the sheaf is brought to the altar on the first fruit, both of the country, which the nation has received for its own, and also of the whole land. So it's telling you here that it's happening right after Passover, not after the weekly Sabbath. So we have a witness that is telling us Philo and Josephus, who were closest to the events, and we know for sure they probably saw it too, and they understood it, and they knew this. Okay. So let me read you about Alfred Edersheim. What does Alfred Edersheim? I'm going to repeat some of the stuff I already repeat to you, but I want to really make mention of some of the things he talks about here. In his book, The Temple and its Services, he quotes and he says, the expression the day after the Sabbath day. The expression the day after the Sabbath day has sometimes been misinterpreted as implying that the presentation of the so-called first sheaf, or the Omer, was always to be made on the day following the weekly Sabbath of the Passover week. This position assumed by the Boethosians, which actually Sadducees, guys, not all the priests were Sadducees. Okay, they were sons of Zadok, but they don't necessarily held to the belief that there was no resurrection. There were 2 houses of school of the Pharisaic movement, the house of Shammai, the house of Hillel. Well, there were 7 types of Pharisees in the 1st century. They had different opinions. But when the Sanhedrin or Beit Din, they made a ruling, they all submitted to it. They had no choice because it was law. Okay? And it says this: the Sadducees in the time of Messiah, and by the Karaite Jews and certain modern interpreters, rest on an erroneous interpretation of the word Sabbath. It is as in analogous allusions to the other feasts in the same chapter. It does not refer to the weekly Sabbath, but to the feast day. The testimony of Josephus, Philo, and Jewish tradition leaves no doubt that in the case we must understand that the Sabbath of the 15th of Nisan, whatever day of the week it fell on, already on the 14th of Nisan, the place to be moved have been marked by delegates of the Sanhedrin, binding in bundles, still standing. The barley was to be mowed or was to be taken. Now remember, this man was Jewish. He was a Christian. He converted. And he understood this because he understood the writings. He spoke the Hebrew. He understood what was said. Okay, and he given you witness from Josephus and Philo. So and then he goes over here and he tells you everything that I already mentioned to you, that I read you from the source. Okay, I don't want to actually. I already read it. I don't want to go over it again. We'll take too long. Okay, so I read you from the cultural background. I read to you from the authorities of the Beit Din. I read to you about Josephus. I read to you about Philo. I read you about Alfred Edersheim. How much evidence do we want? Given your cultural background, historical background, people who were primary sources, who saw it. Even the Mishnah tells you certain things about this stuff. What are the cycles? Let's study the cycles of the fauna and the flora in the Mediterranean. You have November, December, January, and February. November and December, you have the grain fields are plowed and planted. Okay, so the seed goes into the ground, it dies, get the water, and then the crops come up. Okay, then you have the rains. You got the latter rains. The grain fields mature in February, and then you have the latter rains, late February or March and April, whatever. And then you have barley harvest. It's Aviv. When the barley's ready, is the spring. When the barley comes up, it's a type of resurrection. That's really what it means. From winter, death, to spring, resurrection. They all understood this. In the Greco-Roman world, let me go here real quick. I think I have it already. Apologize. In the Greco-Roman, I'm looking for it. I don't know where it is now. There we go. Let me give you a little bit of agriculture in ancient Greece. Farming in ancient Greece was difficult due to the limited amount of good land and farmland. It is estimated that only 20% of the land was usable for crops. The main crops were barley, grapevines, and olive trees. Cereals such as barley and wheat were planted in October and harvest in April and May. So when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, saying Messiah has risen, the first fruit of those who has fallen asleep, they would have understood the message because they understood through the crops and the agriculture that the seed will die and then resurrect in the spring. They all understood this. Okay? So therefore now what we have here is that in the spring, the barley and the wheat come up in April and May, just like in Israel. So when he says in 1 Corinthians 15, but now Messiah has been raised from the dead, the first fruit of those who have fallen asleep. I only got it when I went to Corinth a month ago. When I was there and I'm meditating on all of this and I'm looking at the whole landscape, I'm thinking, I get it. Paul is talking to an audience in which even in their own crops, they will go from death to life. And they understood that in the spring, it was a time of renewal, time of life, time of going from death to life in the winter to the spring. So when he talks in the language of first fruits, yes, we know Yeshua as the first fruits of those who died, and he resurrected the day after the waving of the Omer is perfect. Instead of trying to fix something square into something round, thinking that Yeshua is not Messiah if he doesn't follow exactly on the same day, that's illogical, because the fact that Yeshua was resurrected the day after the waving, it proves the new creation motif. The fact that now they wave the Omer, you have the new grain, the old represents old, and the winter represents death, the springs represents life. In the temple, they wave the Omer, and the next day he resurrects. That's why he's the first fruit of those who are asleep. Makes, I believe, more Messiah and the validity of the Bible, because now it makes sense. Going like, okay, I got it. Is the season, because the first fruits are not presented until Pentecost. You're not allowed to take it to the temple until Pentecost. How many of you did not know that? Let me ask that again. How many of you did not know that you're not allowed to take the first fruits until Pentecost? And there were two different times that you collect the first fruits. From Hanukkah to Pentecost. So whatever you harvest from Hanukkah to Pentecost, and then from Pentecost to Sukkot. Okay? This is very important for us to understand. Hopefully it's making sense to you. Guys, in the chat, please wait until after the teaching. I'll take your questions, because you're asking questions will allow me to finish first, and then it's going to take away from really what I'm trying to convey to you. I'll answer it for you. It says, cereals such as barley and wheat were planted in October and harvest in April and May. The olives were harvest in November, from November to February. Normally, the grapes were harvest in September, exactly like in Israel. They all had the same time because they're living in the northern hemisphere. If they lived in if Moses was living in Australia, New Zealand, and the Torah was given to them back down there, then actually Passover will be in the fall for us, but in the spring for them. Okay. All right. So now when we talk about the metaphor that Paul is using in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 23, which says, put each in his own group, Messiah, the first fruits of what? Of the dead. And then those who are Messiah at his coming. With that being said, let's go to there. At his coming, that's another harvest. That is actually the book of Revelation. Where is the verse? There it is. Revelation 14, verse 14 and 19. I want you to pay attention to the sickle and how many times and from where they're calling. Watch this. And I look, and behold, a white cloud. Sitting on the cloud was the one like the Son of Man, Ben Adam, having a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. He has been enthroned now. Okay, and it says, then another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle to reap, for the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he who sat on the cloud to brandish his sickle upon the earth, and the earth was reaped. Another angel came out from the temple in heaven, who also had a sharp sickle. And another angel, and the one who had power over fire, came out from the altar. And he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, put in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for his grapes are ripe. The angel brandished his sickle upon the earth, and he gathered the clusters of the vine of the earth and cast them into the great winepress and the wrath of God. So what are the seasons here? The book of Revelation just told us when the second coming of Messiah is. That's why it's the last great harvest. It happens in the winter, in the fall. We just saw it here. You have in June, you have the wheat harvest. In May, you have the wheat harvest. Then you have Pentecost coming up in June, right? And then you have the summer. And then you have what is called the grape harvest, July or August. Then you have figs, pomegranate, and date harvest in September. Then you have the olive harvest, and then that is the end of the year in the agricultural cycle. Revelation 14, verse 14 and 19 is telling you about the second coming of Messiah and the last great harvest. If you don't study the temple from its agricultural context, it's not going to make any sense. Are you all with me? So, with that being said, I think I only have one more I already read you the one on the ancient Greece. So the big point here is, I know what I'm supposed to read to you. The first fruits. Let me finish here, and then I'm going to go to the Mishnah to tell you how they would do first fruits. Offerings of the product of the land, which are the first and the best harvest, given in recognition to God's abundant blessings. The term is also used metaphorically to indicate the first of a much larger group that will come later, such as those who were raised from the dead. Offering first fruits. You find that in Leviticus, Exodus 23:19. The best of the first fruits of your land will you bring to the house of the Lord your God. Exodus 34:26. Pay attention to the different names. It says, the beginning of the first fruits of your land, you will bring to the house of God, the Lord your God. That's in the month of Nisan. Okay? Leviticus 2, it talks about the grain and how you roast it. Leviticus 26, verse 1 through 6, it tells you a little bit more about all this stuff. How you do the reciting of the ritual of the first fruit, Bikurim. Okay? First fruit given to the priests and Levites. Numbers 18, 8 to 13 talks about this. Okay, let's read now. Let me go back here. And I want to read to you from the Mishnah. This is the tractate Bikurim, first fruits. And I think it's imperative that if you're going to celebrate Bikurim, first fruits, and you're arguing about first fruits, that you at least consider studying the chapter and how this was done in the temple. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you because it will take us a little too long. And I've had a long day. I've been sitting on this desk here since 8:30 in the morning. I've done 3 teachings today. Okay, and I've answered many questions about this today. So listen to this. It says, tractate, the Bikurim, chapter 1, paragraph 3. It says, they do not bring first fruits. It tells you certain people cannot bring first. Let me read. Paragraph 2. For what reason does he not bring them, the first fruits? Because it is written, you shall bring the first fruits of the fruit of your land. Deuteronomy 26:2. Deuteronomy 26:2 says, you shall not take from the fruits, then you shall take from the fruits, from the first fruits of all the fruit of the ground that you harvest from your land to the Lord your God is given to you. And you shall put it in a basket, and you shall go up to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there. So this is for Pentecost. Remember that. All right. It says, because it is written, you shall bring the first fruit of your land. I'm going to jump to paragraph 3. They do not bring first fruits from any produce other than the 7 kinds for which the land of Israel was noted: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives used for oil, dates for honey. That's Deuteronomy 8:8. Deuteronomy 8:8. To the land of wheat, barley, vines, fig trees, pomegranate trees, a land of olive oil, and honey. Those are the only ones that you can bring to the temple. Now watch this. Not from the dates of the hills, not from the fruit of the valley, and not from the olives used for oil, which are not of the choicest kind. They do not bring first fruits before Pentecost. Now I understand why Yeshua told the disciples, wait until Pentecost. Because they are the first fruits who believe that God has defeated death through the resurrection of Yeshua, who is the firstborn of those who are the first fruit of those who fell asleep, those who died. Now it makes sense. And it says, the men, they do not bring the first fruits before Pentecost. The men of Mount Seboim brought their first fruits before Pentecost, but the priests did not accept first fruits from them, because of the verse that is in the Torah. You shall keep the feast of harvest, Pentecost, of the first fruits of your labor will you sow in the field. That's Exodus 23:16. It says, and you will keep the feast of harvest with the first fruits of your work. When you sow in the field, and you will keep the feast of harvest, gathering when the year goes out. When you gather your work from the field, it's giving you two different harvests, Pentecost and Sukkot. That's the language of the feast in Exodus 23:16. So the new year of Nisan is the year of the agricultural cycle. It has the beginning of a harvest. It has the end of a harvest. That is from the first Nisan and the last, the Tishri. That's the year agricultural cycle. Just like when we have the school calendar, and we have the tax calendar and things like that. They'll have different functions. This is what it does. How many of you did not know that you do not bring the first fruits until Pentecost? How many of you ever wondered how come Yeshua says, no, you have to wait? And then the Spirit of God came on the day of Pentecost. And how that happened. People from the seed of Abraham that has been scattered. Let's go to Acts chapter 2 to put it in perspective. I didn't teach it like this morning. So this is a little different. So let's go to Acts chapter 2. Listen to this. Remember, the seed of Abraham has been scattered to the nations. Now they're scattered. Asia Minor, Rome, Greece, in Assyria, they were in Babylon, as far as India. They were everywhere. Now, all of a sudden, they come. And the day of Pentecost. Now, the day of Pentecost, let me go back to the previous. Let me take it from verse 21. Therefore, it is necessary that for one man, this is chapter 1, that it is necessary, it is necessary that for one man who has accompanied us during all the time in which the Lord Yeshua went in and went out among us, beginning with the baptism of John until now, into the day in which he was taken from us. One of these men must become witness of his resurrection together with us. And they proposed two men, Joseph, called Barsabas, also called Justus, and Matthias. And they prayed and said, you, Lord, who knows all the hearts of all, show clearly which one of these two have chosen to take the place of this ministry and the apostleship from which Judas turned aside and departed his own place. And they cast lots, and they fell on Matthias, and he was added to serve with the 11 apostles. It's interesting. We never talk about this guy. Okay. And it says Pentecost and the coming of the Holy Spirit. Now, remember, you have all of the scattered Israelites and the Jews in Babylon, as far as Persia. Now they're coming from every place, and they're coming at the seed of Abraham, who's been scattered among the nations, and they're returning to Israel during the high holiday. When the day of Pentecost have come, remember, that's when you bring the first fruits. Every person that was there were bringing first fruits, or they were buying to bring fruits when they got to Israel, bring offerings. The people from the land, they brought the first fruits from the land of Israel alone. If you were visiting, then you brought donations and you brought offerings, or maybe a tithe to the temple. They were all together in the same place. Oh, and certainly a sound like a violent rushing wind came from heaven and filled the whole house. And they were sitting, and divided tongues like fire appeared to them and rested on each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them the ability to speak out. And now there were many Jews residing in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when this sound occurred, the crowd gathered and was in confusion, because each one was hearing them speaking in their own language. And they were astounded and astonished, saying, behold, are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how do we hear each one of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residing in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, which is a district of Asia Minor, Pontus and Asia, districts of Asia Minor, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, parts of Libya towards Cyrene, and the Romans who were in town, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them speaking in our own language the great deeds of God, and were all amazed and greatly perplexed, saying to one another, what can this mean? And others jeered and said, they are full of sweet wine, new wine. But Peter, I want you to pay attention to what Peter is going to say. This is going to be very significant because then he's going to tell you why those people are going to be the first fruits of those who were asleep in Yeshua, and how they are the first fruits of the harvest that have been scattered all over the nations, and God has regathered them in his temple. Watch. Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and declared to them, Judean men and all who lived in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and pay attention to my words. For these men are not drunk, as you assume, because it's the third hour of the day. But this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. As it will be in the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit in all flesh, and your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. And even on my male slaves and on my female slaves, and I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will cause wonder in heaven above. Remember that during this event, this is the day of Pentecost. They're reading certain readings of the Bible. They're doing readings. Okay, just keep that in mind. A sign on the earth below, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun will be changed to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and glorious day of the Lord comes. And it will be that at that everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Now, pay attention. There it is right here. It's coming. Israelite men, listen to these words. Yeshua of the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with deeds of power and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, just as you yourself know. This man, Yeshua, delivered up by the determined plan and foreknowledge of God, you executed by nailing to a cross through the hands of lawless men. God raised him up. Remember, the whole period of the waving of the Omer all the way to this event is all about first fruits, going from death to life, from winter to spring, from all beginnings to new beginnings, from a new creation motif. Remember that. That was the theme of the whole 50 days, to go into the freedom, deliverance, when God on the day of Pentecost gave them the Torah as the sign of permanent freedom. Okay, here we go. It says, God raised him up, having brought to an end the pains of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. The whole purpose of Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection in the spring was so that everyone would make the connection. Already they understood that the spring was a time of resurrection, that the spring was a time of new beginnings, renewal, life. And when you have the Omer being done in the past was a ritual that would eventually bring the fulfillment in Messiah. So when they waved the new grain before the Lord, guess what? The next day, Yeshua resurrects as the first fruits of all those who die in the Torah, believing that God will bring the hope of restoration in his master plan. Guys, this topic should not be a point of controversy. This topic should be a point of rejoicing. Instead of changing the days, how many of you why not focus on the function and the role and the purpose of these particular celebrations? And when we understand it from a temple proper and perspective, it's going to only highlight the amazing wisdom of God and how everything worked perfectly in unison, in order that after the waving of the Omer, Messiah resurrects. And then Yeshua resurrecting as the new Adam, as the last Adam, restoring all of humanity. That seed that has died will come alive only if you believe that God raised Yeshua from the dead. That the only one who possesses power over death is the God of Israel. That's the message. And that's the whole thing that we need to be focusing in. Instead of all the arguments and changing calendars, why not study the temple protocol to understand the message behind the message? And this is my presentation of the Omer and the temple ritual in its cultural background. I pray that it's a blessing to you. And I'm only presenting the information. Hopefully, I pray it's a blessing to you. You may not agree with me right now, but I believe the way you did. I began to look at all this stuff and I'm thinking, I get it. I understand what it means. No need to change anything. The message is really important and impactful. And once you learn it, you will see that it's so powerful to understand how everything fits perfectly in order for the master plan of God to fulfill every promise that He made in the Torah for the resurrection of humanity and the return to the garden. Shalom to every single one of you. Bye bye.